Hello, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Zuber with Zuber Lawler LLP. I'm here with Lizzie Fonkboner, Tehran East, and Raza Lawrence. Well, actually, Tehran is not with us, but he will be joining us shortly. There was a client emergency. This webinar is entitled Legally Psychedelic, the Oregon Psilocybin Services Program. But first, let me tell you a little bit about our firm. We have approximately 40 to 45 attorneys nationwide. Our attorney selectivity standards are tops in the industry. We handle virtually all legal matters a business can encounter, including both litigation and transactional. We're particularly advanced when it comes to new frontiers, including crypto and blockchain, cannabis, and of course, psychedelics. We're fully invested in psychedelics and have clients already operating legally in this space with ketamine clinics, as well as clients looking to take advantage of the opening up of this industry at the state level in Oregon, Colorado, and wherever else this movement leads before federal legalization. My brother Tom Zuber and I co-founded Psychedelia, the leading magazine in the industry focusing on all things psychedelics. Tom, our firm's managing partner, also sits on the board of the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition Board, a top lobbying organization in psychedelics. We're also invested in Psychedelics Today, a leading provider of educational programs in the psychedelic space. And we often partner with Microdose, who hosts the industry-leading Wonderland Conference in Miami every year. As you can see, we're very much neck deep in the psychedelic space. As for myself personally, I specialize in intellectual property and general commercial litigation. I've handled many ownership disputes wherein company owners and executives are at loggerheads. This has been especially prevalent in the cannabis space, where one of our awards exceeded $65 million and is likely the largest award in the cannabis industry. I've also successfully appealed and later defended a $62 million award against one of our software clients. Though we're not trial counsel in initial suit, we got that valuation reduced to zero. So we do handle high stakes cases with great success. Now we are just going to go ahead and jump right in. Beginning this presentation is our counsel, James Raza Lawrence. Raza, can you take it away?
Hey, everybody. Great to see you all here today. I think this is a really exciting topic, and it's really one of the fun parts of being a lawyer. Just a little bit about my background. I've been doing cannabis-related law since 2009. And I started out doing mostly criminal cases representing medical marijuana collective members in California, in state and federal courts. And then my practice has shifted more towards regulatory, corporate, business law type work since cannabis licensing started in California in 2018. Now we're seeing psychedelics following a very similar path to cannabis. We're just seeing states starting to legalize and regulate commercial activity while it's still totally illegal under federal law. And these conflicts between the state and federal laws create all kinds of interesting legal issues, which I think makes it a really fascinating area to work as a lawyer. Also, cannabis and psychedelics, they're both very old plant-based medicines that many are finding are very helpful for mental health issues and as substitutes or complements to prescription drugs. And a lot of people are recognizing there's a mental health crisis going on in our country, which was exacerbated due to the COVID lockdowns, and are looking towards turning towards these traditional plant-based medicines that can help us. So these legal pathways are just starting to emerge, and these brand new industries are coming out of what was formerly the black market and becoming a part of the legitimate regulated markets. So psilocybin, what is it? It's a naturally occurring psychedelic compound that's found in magic mushrooms. It's not man-made, it's totally natural. And the reason we're here today is Oregon is legalizing the production and sale of psilocybin under state law, but it remains a Schedule I controlled substance under federal law, subject to really severe criminal penalties. People can end up getting sentenced to decades in federal prison, depending on the quantity that they're found with. So it's kind of serious stuff, the federal laws. But Oregon is the first state to license federally illegal psychedelics, and it's sort of testing the waters for other states that are also looking at psychedelic legalization. Now, psilocybin, where is it found? It's found in over 180 different species of mushrooms, And how does it work? Well, it's psychoactive capabilities that derive from the compound's resemblance to the structures of neurotransmitters that convey impulses from one nerve to another. It serves as a catalyst to hallucinations by activating serotonin receptors in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain tasked with mood, cognition, and perception. And psilocybin, it's been used in religious ceremonies for over 1,000 years. There's a theory called the stoned ape theory that says that humans' evolution from early ancestors was accelerated by the addition of psychedelic mushrooms in human diets, allowing people to become better hunters and promoting community bonding. And we don't know exactly how long it's been used by humans, but people have seen a 12,000-year-old mural in Australia that shows mushrooms and psychedelic illustrations. So we think people have been using it for quite a long time.
That is insane. Raza, what does it mean to be on Schedule 1?
So under the Controlled Substances Act, federal law, various controlled substances are listed in different schedules, depending on sort of how serious the penalties can be and how they're regulated. And psilocybin is in Schedule 1, which is the most strict category of controlled substances under federal law. And it means that the federal government has looked at this. They think that it has a very high risk of abuse, that there's no acceptable medical treatment, and that there's no way to use it safely, even under medical supervision. Now, a lot of research and experience is showing a lot of people think that these conclusions are totally wrong and that it should be reclassified. We'll get to that a little bit later. But for now, it's in this very strict category where there's basically no acceptable use, and you can't even prescribe it for medical purposes, and it's subject to really serious criminal penalties.
This goes all the way back to the Nixon administration and the political and cultural wars that fostered the war on drugs.
Yeah, exactly. And over the decades since Nixon, the drug laws have gotten more severe over time. Our current president was involved in some crime bills that really jacked up some of these sentences. We have these really harsh sentencing guidelines in federal court that they add up the weights of the substances and as I mentioned, can result in decades in federal prison, even life in prison sometimes for nonviolent drug offenses.
Unbelievable. What other states do you know are currently considering opening up on psychedelics?
Well, so a number of cities around the country have passed laws kind of decriminalizing the possession of psychedelics, but not the commercial use, or deprioritizing the arrest and prosecution of them. But in terms of licensing, Oregon is the very first one to actually give out licenses allowing people to do commercial activity. But we actually have coming up in this election, I guess it's just a couple weeks away, in Colorado, there's a psychedelic initiative that's similar to Oregon's. Colorado's proposal would allow the sale and use of psilocybin, but like in Oregon, it could happen only in a licensed center where people can use them under the supervision of trained facilitators. And Colorado's law actually goes a little further than Oregon in that it would also allow mescaline, ibogaine, and DMT, which is found in ayahuasca. The plan in Colorado is to start with psilocybin, kind of see how that's going, and then expand into these other areas.
And we will be keeping an eye on that. Moving on to the next slide.
So how does it work when there's federal law and state laws that say different things? What controls, how is a person supposed to know which law to follow? So it says in the Constitution, it tells us if there's a conflict between federal law and state law, the federal law trumps the state law. Federal law is considered the supreme law of the land. Now the next question then is, well, what does the federal government have the power to do? Isn't it supposed to let states kind of regulate this activity that's occurring only within the states? Well, in 2005, the US Supreme Court held in Gonzalez versus Rage that the federal government does have the power under the Interstate Commerce Clause to criminalize the production and use of Schedule I controlled substances, even if that activity occurs only within a single state. under the theory that such activity in the aggregate could substantially affect interstate commerce.
Raza, is there any limit to the federal government's constitutional power to criminalize psychedelic activity occurring only within a single state?
Well, there's not much of a limit. Originally, back in 1942, the Supreme Court decided the case of Wickard versus Filburn. And this was a farmer who was growing wheat on his own land to be fed to his own animals on the farm. And the farmer tried to argue the federal government can't stop him from doing this because it's not commerce, let alone interstate commerce. But the Supreme Court found that this fell under the Commerce Clause because the farmer's activity reduced the amount of wheat that he would buy in the open market, which was traded nationally, and that you have to consider the cumulative actions of thousands of other similar farmers. So somewhat illogically, they found that this activity was Congress regulating commerce among the several states, even though this was one farmer growing it for himself to feed to his own animals. Now, in Gonzalez versus Raich, the 2005 case, the Supreme Court extended the logic of this to cannabis. And in that case, it involved the production and use of homegrown cannabis for medical purposes. And the Supreme Court said, yep, that counts as interstate commerce, as regulating interstate commerce too, under the reasoning that marijuana grown for home consumption was likely to be drawn into the interstate market due to the high demand. So basically, under this logic, almost any activity could fall under the Commerce Clause, and there really is essentially no limit in practice to how much the federal government can regulate here.
Overreach on the Commerce Clause is nothing new, nor is growing weed to feed your farm animals. My college roommates did the exact same thing. Let's move on. Next slide.
Okay, just in terms of the parallels between the Oregon psilocybin program and the commercial cannabis industry, as we mentioned, in both cases, states are legalizing and licensing the distribution of federally illegal controlled substances. And the federal government, they remain free to come in and prosecute anyone who's violating the federal controlled substances laws, even if those people are fully compliant with state and local laws that affirmatively allow the conduct at issue. Now, there are some limits in the cannabis context we'll get into shortly. But basically, the state license holders, as we'll see, they suffer various consequences as a result of the federal illegality, including punitive tax rules, lack of access to banking and intellectual property protection, and the constant threat of criminal prosecution and asset forfeiture. But there are some tips we'll get into about how people following the state laws can avoid problems with the feds. Now, one limit to the federal authority here is the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, passed in 2014 and renewed every year since then. It's a part of the federal budget, but that basically says the DOJ is not allowed to spend money to interfere with the implementation of state medical cannabis laws. There's no similar legal protection for people conducting commercial activity relating to non-medical recreational cannabis or psilocybin.
Raza, has the federal government been prosecuting people conducting non-medical commercial cannabis activity pursuant to state licenses?
So even though they're free to do so under the law to prosecute these people in practice, under Trump and Biden, the DOJ has generally refrained from prosecuting any cannabis businesses that are complying with state laws, even if they're non-medical. Now, originally back under Obama, around 2010, his administration actually sent out letters to state and local government officials who are contemplating licensing, saying the federal government could come in and even prosecute the local government officials and the license holders. But fortunately, Obama kind of backed off on that, and people following the state laws pursuant to license have been pretty free to operate without federal interference.
Great. And our producer Celeste has nudged us to keep this thing moving.
Okay, now there has been some guidance on what to do to avoid federal problems. 2013, the federal government under Obama issued what's called the Cole Memorandum, providing non-binding guidance regarding marijuana enforcement. And this memo was rescinded by Trump in 2018, right after he went into office, but it nevertheless provides some insight into the risk factors that could trigger federal enforcement of controlled substances laws. And the memo basically stated that given its limited resources, the Justice Department generally would not enforce federal marijuana prohibition when people are following state laws regulating marijuana. And you can go to the next slide. They list out a set of factors that you're supposed to look at in terms of triggering federal interest, distributing to minors, financing other criminal gangs and enterprises, diversion of the substances to other states, using other illegal drugs in the same business, violent activity, promotion of drug driving, growing marijuana in public lands, or possessing marijuana on federal property. And even though this has been rescinded, Attorney General Merrick Garland, our current one, had said that he doesn't think it would be worth the DOJ's time to pursue prosecutions against Americans who are complying with state law. And even though the Cole memo is still in effect, the best practice is to follow those guidelines. It's a good, best evidence we have as to what will trigger federal enforcement efforts. Now, we would expect that the same kind of federal policies would carry over to psilocybin, since it's really similar in a lot of ways to cannabis, but we don't know exactly how the Biden administration will treat the subject matter. But there are some signs that the federal government may be loosening up to psilocybin, and that it'll be smoother sailing going forward. You can go to the next slide. There has been a lot of research lately, federally approved research trials. There's a bunch of studies showing that psilocybin has great medical effects, both for depression, anxiety, PTSD, and these studies are showing it's generally not addictive, and it doesn't really pose any public safety risk as long as it's used in the right circumstances. You don't want people taking mushrooms and driving a school bus or flying an airplane, but under the right circumstances, it seems to be relatively safe. Also, they've shown amazing results to treat alcohol use disorder. In a recent study, more than 80% of people using psilocybin with psychotherapy drastically reduced their drinking 8 months after they're starting, and 50% quit drinking altogether. This has a breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA, kind of putting on the fast track for the review process. And also in 2018, President Trump signed the Right to Try Act, which allows terminally ill patients to have access to experimental therapies like psilocybin that have passed the initial round of testing. Go to the next slide. There are some signs that the federal government is easing up. This letter from the Health and Human Services Department has some positive things about psilocybin to say, and anticipates that regulators will approve it as a designated breakthrough therapy for depression within the next 2 years, and that it looks promising to treat the mental health crisis. And just a couple other promising notes from the federal government. The DEA announced earlier this year it was going to add 5 different DMT analogs, which is the main ingredient in ayahuasca, to Schedule 1. There was a public hearing. Advocates and researchers spoke out against it, and the DEA reversed its decision, signaling its openness to psychedelics. And the support in the federal government appears to be bipartisan. Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw and Matt Getz recently testified in support of studying the benefits of psychedelics for military members with PTSD and other conditions. You can go to the next slide. There are problems with banking. Financial institutions, they've been reluctant to do business with cannabis businesses. There's some guidance from the Treasury Department issued in 2014 based on the Cole memo that explains how banks can provide services. Basically, the banks have to file reports with the federal government for federally illegal activity if they suspect their clients are engaged in it. But there's a streamlined process where if the bank concludes that the account holder is following state law, it's a very limited report they have to make, but they're supposed to do due diligence and report any red flags to the federal government. You can go to the next slide. We'll try to get through the rest of these quickly because I know we have other sections. There is no federal guidance on psilocybin banking. We expect that banks may follow the FinCEN guidance because it's similar to cannabis. but anyone doing business in this area should plan for the possibility that they need to be a cash-only business, as many cannabis companies have operated, and plan for the security that requires. There probably will be some banks open to doing business with psychedelic businesses as they have with cannabis. The investment bankers Morgan Stanley and the accountants KPMG both recently released positive reports about the potential of psychedelics. So the financial world is open to doing business with psychedelics, it appears. You go to the next slide.
Okay, and I think we're doing pretty good on time now.
Okay, great. Taxes, there's a pretty punitive tax rule 280E. It applies to the cannabis industry. It also applies to psilocybin industry because it's a Schedule I substance. It basically says any business in this area have to pay federal income taxes on all their income without deducting any of their business expenses. So it results in a lot higher tax bill. You can go to the next slide. There are some ways to minimize the expenses of 280E compliance. So one aspect is you are allowed to deduct the cost of goods sold, which would be the cost of the psilocybin itself and the transportation used in acquiring the psilocybin. So these amounts can be deducted from taxable income if there's any way to just kind of shift the revenues towards these areas. The other strategy businesses have used is sort of segregating aspects of their business out into separate entities. And that would be the business activities that are not directly engaged in the trafficking. So there can be an IP owning entity. There can be a real estate owning entity. The business can sublease portions of the premises to non-psilocybin touching aspects. But basically the idea is to create as small a scope as possible for the trafficking business that would be subject to 280E, and have another entity which could have the same owners as the trafficking business do the non-trafficking services that complement the business. So that this is a way to kind of minimize the pain of 280E. Go to the next slide. Trademarks, important for any business in a new industry. Federal trademarks, however, can only be registered if the product's used in commerce in a way that does not violate federal law. So the business that sells psilocybin goods or services that are illegal under federal law, they can't get a trademark for that. But you can register other aspects of the business under federal trademark protection, such as selling apparel, or other federally legal aspects, and then you can register the trademark in connection with that lawful business, and at least that gives you some protection for the brand name. Also, you can look at state trademarks at the state level. Oregon, California, other states have registered trademarks specifically for cannabis that's allowed under state law, and that gives you protection, at least within the specific state, from people stealing your brand. Now, the Oregon Health Authority under the Oregon law has the power to prohibit advertising of psilocybin products and to regulate the advertising. So we're still remains to be seen how much branding can be done and what kind of the limits of the advertising will be. You go to the next slide.
It's very interesting, the interplay with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office when we're trying to file these things. A lot of people who file these things don't disclose that they're in a cannabis industry, or in this case, in a psychedelics industry, and open themselves up to potential fraud on the PTO defenses when they're trying to enforce these marks in the future when things open up legally. Our firm actually has several strategies to deal with those particular issues that have been successful, at least in getting these things registered at the federal level. Moving on to the next slide.
Okay, there are also unique issues for attorneys due to the federal-state conflict. That the attorneys, they don't want to be themselves charged with criminal violations. Theoretically, attorneys could be charged with aiding and abetting federal law violations or conspiring to violate federal law for their work while representing psychedelic clients. Attorneys could also be found in violation of the attorney ethics rules for advising and assisting a client on conduct that's illegal under federal law, which could jeopardize their license to practice law. Oregon actually amended their rules of professional conduct to deal with this issue for cannabis. saying that specifically that a lawyer may advise a client regarding Oregon's marijuana-related laws, so long as the lawyer also advises the client about the federal policy. There isn't this language about psilocybin. I would expect that the Oregon bar would treat it the same, but we don't have that specific language in there. So we're going to have to, see how it goes.
So this definitely is not for the extremely risk averse.
No, but a lot of people had questions originally for cannabis law in the beginning, these concerns with attorneys getting in trouble, but there have been a number of ethics opinions issued across the country, kind of giving tips on how clients can, or how attorneys can do this ethically. Basically, attorneys practicing in this area should always clearly advise the clients that the conduct is illegal under federal law, and the attorney should never assist the clients in concealing or hiding illegal activity. And if the attorney follows these points, the ethics opinions have said it's okay with cannabis, and they would seem to apply equally to psilocybin. But we have to see exactly how that develops.
Yeah, it's a good idea to put these closures in connection with an engagement letter or retainer agreement right at the outset of these engagements.
Absolutely. Last slide for my section. You can go on. There's a number of other issues that we don't have time to get into now, but from the federal illegality, there's no bankruptcy protection, but there are some other strategies that people have developed in the cannabis area for financially distressed businesses, including workouts, assignments for the benefits of creditors, and state court receiverships. There's difficulty sometimes obtaining insurance. Insurance will be important for these psilocybin service centers, kind of blazing a new trail and a type of business. And there's the potential for people to get hurt, if they're not, the businesses aren't managed properly, but there are some insurance companies that have expressed openness to working in this area. Getting loans for a business can be hard. A lot of times people have to get hard money private loans because financial institutions won't give loans to a federal controlled substances trafficker. There's skepticism of a lot of landlords about leasing to a federally illegal business. Landlords are worried that their mortgage could be canceled by their bank, that the landlord could get criminally prosecuted, or that their property could actually get seized under asset forfeiture. And finally, we got into earlier, due to the largely all cash nature of the businesses, there's security concerns. So people have to consider, armed guards and that sort of thing when dealing with a lot of cash. And with that, I will turn it over to the next person.
Okay, step back here, and I am going to introduce our next presenter, also attorney with our firm, Lizzie Fonkboner. Lizzie helps run our psychedelics practice group from Denver, Colorado. She is brilliant in digesting new proposed regulations in the psychedelic space, particularly in Oregon. She's also fully immersed in the cannabis space and assists our clients with regulatory compliance, licensing, contracts, and all other operational aspects of running a plant medicine business in today's emerging legal landscape. Hello, Lizzie.
Hi, so happy to be here.
And let's jump back in. I'm going to put the slideshow back up.
And I will be talking about the laws and the regulations that we see now in Oregon. So the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act, also known as Measure 109, is housed in the Oregon Revised Statutes, Chapter 475A. And then the adopted rules that are, the Oregon Health Authority has adopted certain rules that are located in the Oregon Administrative Rules, Chapter 333. And the rest are the draft rules, which will be eventually housed in the administrative rules, in case anyone wants to look them up. Next slide, please. So I will quickly go over the license types, as I think perhaps maybe some people are familiar with them, but I want to make sure that we at least cover some of the highlights. So there is the facilitator license, which is the only individually held license. And the formal requirements for holding that license is being 21 years of age or older, having a high school diploma or equivalent, being an Oregon resident for the past 2 years, and completion of an Oregon Health Authority approved training program, and then passing certain exams, one provided by the training program provider and one by the state. The next license is the laboratory license, so the testing lab. This does not have a residency requirement, which I will, for ownership, which I'll discuss a little bit further for the other license types. But for labs, they need to not only be licensed by the Oregon Health Authority, but they will also need to be accredited by ORLAP, which is the Oregon Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program. So it's sort of two layers with that one of accreditation and licensing. Next slide, please. The manufacturer license. This is where the psilocybin will be actually produced. And then the service center license, where the psilocybin will be consumed by a client or person. Both of these have residency requirements, which I'll discuss in a bit more detail in a moment. Both also have a limitation of financial interests in the business. So namely, an individual or legal entity cannot hold a financial interest in more than one manufacturing license. And then an individual or legal entity cannot hold a financial interest in more than 5 service centers. The draft rules require disclosures of all financial interests. The financial interest is defined as pretty broadly in the draft rules as anyone with an ownership interest in the license, but not to include an investment whereby the investor does not have control over the nature, amount, or timing of the investment. So one thing to note is that these are draft rules. So there was a rule advisory committee that met in September. So some of these may be updated. We are hopeful to see additional updates here shortly because there's a public comment coming up. We'll discuss that in a bit. Both the manufacturer and service center have location requirements, and we'll have local requirements that relate to zoning and land use. And a manufacturer may only produce and sell psilocybin products if they have received an endorsement from the Oregon Health Authority for that type of production. So they can hold multiple endorsements, but they must request that on their application. And the endorsements are currently cultivation, extraction, and edible production. Next slide, please. And here is the residency requirement. So until January 2025, there is a 2-year residency requirement for facilitators, which is the individually held license, service centers, and manufacturers. So the statute states that if the direct owner of the business operating or to be operated under the license is a legal entity, the application must provide proof that more than 50% of the shares, membership interests, partnership interests, or other ownership interests in general of the legal entity are held directly or indirectly by one or more individuals who have been residents of Oregon for 2 years or more. This sunsets in 2025, but it is not an all-out bar to out-of-state owners. So a non-Oregon resident can still hold 49.9% of a business, manufacturer or service center, and then after 2029, the residency requirement falls off. So there's also a list of a few things. This is not an exhaustive list of what the Oregon Health Authority may accept as proof of residency, which we were kind of curious about what that would look like and what the definition would look like. But next slide, please. And there are just, I wanted to touch on a few of the application requirements. This is not all of them by any means, but some important ones in terms of disclosures. So an applicant will need to disclose all applicants, which is a defined term, and all financial interests, which we just talked about a moment ago. But of note, an applicant is defined as someone who holds or controls an interest of more than 10% in the business, someone who's entitled to receive 10% or more in revenue, profits, and proceeds, or who's entitled to exercise control over the business. So this is kind of a broad scope of who would be considered an applicant and who needs to be disclosed. And let's see, so we discovered the proof of residency, and there will also need to be a location documentation, which is in the form of a land use compatibility statement that the applicant will need to get from the local jurisdiction, basically confirming that where their business is where it's allowed to be under the land use or zoning code. And all applicants will need to submit a social equity plan, and this plan will need to address and include a description of the application of diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion practices and policies, as well as objective performance measures that a licensee will need to use to evaluate their social equity plan. And then we'll scoot to the next slide, and I'll just briefly go over the location requirements, because this is still, I think we missed one. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I have mine out of order. Well, I'll talk about it here a bit as well. So the licensed premises, and those who are familiar with the cannabis industry, the regulated cannabis industry, this is a familiar term. And there are a lot of requirements around the location in which the business is licensed, such as security systems and cameras. In terms of where the licensed premises can be located, there are some regulations around the service centers. For instance, they can't be located within 1,000 feet of a public or private elementary or secondary school. A manufacturer and service center and lab cannot be located on public lands. They can't be co-located with a cannabis or liquor store licensee or a healthcare facility. So there's a lot of restrictions about where you can be located. And that all kind of hinges on what local jurisdictions, cities and counties, will opt in or opt out of allowing psilocybin businesses in their jurisdiction. Next slide, please. Oh, I think that's moving on to Tehran. So what is next for the regulations specifically? There's this November election, we will hear whether which local jurisdictions have opted in or opted out. We'll hopefully see some time, place, manner regulations come out for those jurisdictions who have opted in. There is a public comment phase this November, and I believe it's until the 23rd. So we'll see if there are some additionally updated draft rules that we can look at. The final rules to come out in December, and then Oregon will open the doors for applications starting January 2nd, 2023.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. And now joining us is Tehran East. He is also an attorney with our firm. He's also a member of our Psychedelics practice group and handles general corporate practice, including corporate governance, securities, insurance regulation, M&A, leverage finance, and all matters of corporate legal work. And before joining our firm, Tehran was in-house with Warner Music Group. And like our friend Raza, who you heard from, he's also a Harvard grad, but like Raza, he's a nice guy, so do not hold it against him. And Tehran, take it away. I will put the slide up.
All right, thanks a lot, Jeff. I have been given word that we only have about 11 minutes left, so I will try to go through this expeditiously while keeping all the details intact, if at all possible. All right, so first start off to get more into the sort of nitty gritty with all this, we will be talking about the restrictions on sales for psilocybin products in Oregon. So to start off, all psilocybin products that are sold in Oregon at service centers will need to be locally sourced within the state of Oregon, packaged in the state of Oregon, and sold within, of course, the state of Oregon, i.e. there can be no sort of out-of-state participation within the legalized psilocybin market in Oregon. Everything has to be sourced and produced within the state of Oregon. In addition to that, at service centers specifically, interestingly enough, patients are allowed to consume other food or drinks in the service centers, although these products will be limited to products that do not cause any further intoxication, such as alcohol, no dietary or nutritional supplements, and no prescription or non-prescription drugs either. And also with that said, it's contemplated now that psilocybin products at service centers will not be able to be discounted or given away for free in conjunction with any other retail sales at the service centers. And clients are also interestingly enough barred from bringing in any psilocybin into the service centers, as well as taking out any psilocybin products from the service centers as well. So everything has to be purchased at the site and left at the site for all purposes. In addition to that, in terms of limitations for products, service centers are limited to possessing 100 grams of psilocybin at one given time, whereas manufacturers may only possess 200 grams. I know it probably sounds like very little in comparison with cannabis, but given the fact that people typically limit their consumption of psilocybin to not more than about 3.5 grams, which is considered an eighth of an ounce per sitting or trip, if you want to use that terminology. This is far more than a normal amount, and I believe 100 grams would be 28 eighths, whereas 200 would be about 57. And I can't imagine what would happen if you take that much, but that's probably not allowed anyway, so that is not really an issue. Also, that being said, a single serving at a service center for psilocybin cannot exceed 0.25 grams, or a quarter of a gram of psilocybin, or if you want to get technical with the metric system, 25 milligrams. With that being said, there is actually not a lower limit for the dosage of psilocybin within a product that's sold in its service center. So you could potentially have micrograms, which serves very well for the rave of micro dosing that we've seen within the last couple of years that people are all raving and ranting about. So microdosing would do very well in this market. And with that being said as well, only one serving is allowed to be packaged for one specific dose. So you can only have the maximum of a quarter of a gram per one package. I think we can go to the next slide with this. Oh, wait, sorry. No, I left out a couple of issues. Sorry, can we go back? Okay, great. Also, just want to touch on advertising for a moment. This should be fairly obvious for anyone who's participating within the legal cannabis field, but the law is very clear that you cannot make products that appeal to children. So that not only limits the type of packaging that you can have, whereas you can't put SpongeBob on a packaging. Not that, I mean, you'll have problems with the psilocybin market as well as possible trade and copyright issues with that. But you also can't make the edibles or whatever other products are sold into shapes that specifically appeal to children, such as dinosaurs or other cartoon characters or anything of the sort. Edibles must also follow all guidelines for the appropriate underlying foods, such as allergen or warnings or essential nutritional facts for the principal food that's used in a product. And also, in terms of advertising on websites, it's likely that many websites will have to specifically put up blockers for age restrictions. Sure, many of us have seen those before, where you have to verify that you're over the age of 21. And also, likewise, we'll have to put up blockers for any GPS tracking in order to not track the activity of minors who may accidentally access those websites. With that said, products are also limited from making any general health claims, as psilocybin has not yet been approved by the FDA, although that may change sometime soon. But for the time being, they have been restricted from making any claims with regards to any health benefits that may be received from taking psilocybin products. And now we're going to go to the next slide. All right. So now we have, as Lizzie had mentioned earlier, some real property issues. As Lizzie stated, the cities and counties are allowed to opt out of psilocybin licensing at their discretion. As of this time, only 9 counties have not opted out of licensing restrictions, those being Benton, Columbia, Hood River, Lincoln, Lane, Multnomah, Wasco, Washington, and Yam Hill, excuse me. This could actually change sometime soon, being that the midterm elections are coming up soon on November 8th. With that said, many counties will put this up for referendum, in which case the citizens of the county will be allowed to vote on whether they want their counties to allow for the licensing or not. And there, I believe we're good to go to the next slide on that. and also the land use restrictions, which Lizzie touched on a bit, so I won't spend too much time on this. But all cities and counties will have some sort of flexibility in regulating the licensed psilocybin businesses by means of time, place, and manner restrictions. So this sort of falls in line a lot with how cannabis was regulated within the state as well, wherein they sort of leave it up to a reasonableness standard. And if you're a lawyer at all, you know reasonable is the most arbitrary term in the legal field. So there are some restrictions in terms of, well, definitive restrictions in terms of where these businesses can be housed, such as not housing them within a certain distance from school zone or from a house of religious services, or not creating a nuisance by means of disrupting lighting or a smell or anything of the sort. And with that said, in the instance that a county prohibits the creation of any psilocybin businesses within the county itself, unincorporated portions of the county may still be able to create their own licensing regimes, as they don't follow fully in suit with all of the regulations that counties impose. Also, with that being said, a couple of other restrictions on manufacturers would be that they cannot be in the same building as a liquor licensee, a healthcare facility, restaurants, or mobile units, or also residences. Further restrictions on service centers include not being 1,000 feet within the public or private elementary school or secondary school, as well as not in any area zoned exclusively for residential use within the city limits. And going forward with the manufacture of edibles, they cannot be produced at restaurants, mobile units, so that excludes so-called ghost kitchens, share a food establishment with another party, same thing with ghost kitchens, process non-psilocybin food for commercial sales, so you are restricted from only producing psilocybin products within that vicinity or that building, and they cannot operate in a kitchen that is not licensed by the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And I think we can go for the next slide on that one too as well. Okay, so a couple of organizational issues here. So I think Raza touched on a bit of this, but to expand on some of these clauses. So it's been, it seems as though C Corp structures, which allow for, well, are of course the opposite of S Corps, wherein the income flows through to the individual. Instead, with an S Corp, the income is taxed at both the corporate level as well as the individual level. It would most likely be beneficial to psilocybin companies within Oregon to adopt a C Corp structure rather than S Corp or others. This would beneficial tax structure of 21%, and also allows for some protection from owners for punitive taxation of 280E, and provides sort of the best beneficial investment structure for future capital raises by private individuals as well. I think we're okay with that one as well. And IP. So Raza touched on this as well, but to go back a little bit, so there are two further means of sort of allowing for intellectual property protection within the psilocybin space. One being trade secrets, wherein it is very aptly titled, and it is essentially just a secret that you keep from the rest of the trade. Individuals are allowed to essentially keep the secret to the secret sauce, as you would say, by just not writing it down and not passing it off to other individuals. With that being said, you can also enter into non-disclosure agreements with employees, ensuring that they are not able to pass off the secrets of the company or any of its recipes or any of the sort to other businesses. And also, with addition to that, copyright protection actually does exist in a very limited frame for psilocybin businesses as well. So even though trademark protection is only granted for logos or other trademarks that are actually federally legal, copyright actually does allow for some registration of underlying works that may be illegal, although not the actual product itself. So, for instance, a psilocybin logo could possibly be copyrighted in the instance that it fits all the criteria for copyrightable works as stated within the Copyright Act. To take you back to my second year of law school, the tenets of that would be to be original to the author, possess a minimal degree of creativity, be fixed in a tangible form that is sufficiently permanent to be reproduced, such as writing, video, well, many other things, video games, anything of the sort, although it wouldn't apply here. But so it's essentially in the business's best interest to attempt to register whatever they can with the U.S. Copyright Office, which would more than likely be the logo for the company itself. If an individual business does not choose to opt to register its logo within copyright law, it's still granted protection to a certain extent, but that protection is mostly limited to essentially just takedown notices rather than being able to sue for statutory damages or attorney's fees or the infringement claim itself. So it would behoove businesses to sort of try to take as much protection as they can within the limits of the law under copyright law. And I think that leads us to our next slide.
That is it.
Oh, wow, perfect.
Okay, thank you, Taran, Lizzie, and Raza. That was a lot of stuff to unpack, and I know that there's a lot more as well, but we do have to move on to audience questions. Do we have any questions? I know I have one, but let's see. Do we have anything from anyone? Okay, not sure we have anything. My one question, which is only half Oregon and half Colorado, is what if we know what do we know about any major differences between the two anticipated regulatory schemes and the practical effects of those differences? And that's for anyone.
Between Oregon and Colorado?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I was opening up the question queue, so just wanted to make sure. I have a little, I can add a little bit to that. One of the, like Raza had mentioned, one of the differences is that Colorado would start with psilocybin, and then after 2 years could expand to different named psychedelic drugs. And one of the other important things to note is there's no residency requirement in the draft legislation or in the measure rather. And there's a potential for home use, not just at a service center. So in the Colorado measure, they're actually healing centers, and it would be, you have the option potentially, we'll see how it plays out if it's passed, to have a home use, which is not something contemplated under Oregon's measure.
Now, a lot of people seem to have a misconception with Oregon that it's only medical psilocybin licenses, but it's available to anyone who's an adult can go into these services. Cannabis, started with medical marijuana, where you needed to get a doctor's recommendation to use the substance, but that's not the case in Oregon. It's open to all adults. Lizzie, do you know for Colorado, is there a medical component of this, or is it open to everybody like Oregon?
Right. Yeah. It's open to everyone. Unlike the medical cannabis regime, you don't need a doctor's recommendation to go. So that would be the same with Oregon and in Colorado.
Yeah, to echo what Raza just said as well, he's right. This isn't necessarily a medical program per se, as they haven't really advertised it as sort of medical therapy. It's more so what a lot of professionals have started calling trip sitting. So whereas there may be a medical component behind it, it's sort of wrapped up within the recreational component as well. So there's a possibility you may use it for the purposes of alleviating depression or other mental symptoms. But with that being said, they're not sort of advertising it as a sort of therapy service, and it is more so recreationally based, even though there are many restrictions behind it that would sort of lead it more so towards the medical space.
It'll be interesting to see what direction it goes in the federal arena. It looks like they're evaluating it right now as a medical treatment, and the idea is you would need to get prescribed by a doctor. Interestingly, that's not how the states are doing it so far. The same issue comes up with cannabis. Biden's announced there's going to be a review of the scheduling of cannabis, and Biden during his campaign had said he wanted to move it to Schedule 2, but that's a schedule that's a very heavily regulated, prescription only drug category. Fentanyl's in that category, and that would really potentially upend the current industry if it shifted that and kind of transition over to big pharma controlling everything. And it's interesting, what direction they'll go both on cannabis and psilocybin.
Is that a coincidence?
Open it up to the broader market, or whether it'll be tightly controlled by the FDA.
We do have some more questions, and I do want to get to some of them. They're good ones. First, we'll take them in order. Can you comment on the risks for mental health practitioners who want to also be facilitators? Given all the issues with liability, what risks, benefit analysis can you give us?
Yeah, so I can handle that one. So there is a bit of risk in terms of, well, I'm assuming that we're mostly speaking about medical practitioners here. So as of right now, due to the federal illegality of the psilocybin space, there is a bit of a risk in doctors fully involving themselves within the practice of distributing psilocybin. We're not really sure as of right now where it's going to go. As Raza had just said, there is talk about making it Schedule 2, but as of right now, we don't really have, some sort of amendment or any sort of proclamation stating that the federal government will choose to 100% not go after this industry as it stands right now, or as it will stand in the future. So there is some sort of risk there. With that said, it's hard to really quantify.
They would be prescribing medications that are illegal.
So it's actually not prescribing. That came up in California. Doctors are not allowed to prescribe a Schedule 1 controlled substance. They recommend it under the medical cannabis, not prescribe. And there was case law on that, whether the doctors could be liable for recommending medical marijuana. It's a Schedule 1 substance. And the case of Conant versus Walters in the Ninth Circuit, which applies in Oregon and California, says doctors have a First Amendment free speech right to recommend these substances, even though they're federally illegal.
By the way,
not directly providing the controlled substances, and it's limited to speech.
Yeah, not surprisingly, we have way too many questions that we can answer. So I'm very quickly going to pop our email addresses on the board so that you have that available. Hold on, let me just go to the last slide here, and you can email any one of us and you'll get a response from someone who knows, so that if you have the question, we're obviously not going to get to all the questions here today, but you can email any one of us with our emails on the board there, and we will follow up with you. Thank you for joining us, and let's see if we can get in a couple more questions here. Let's see. Oh, I lost my Q&A. Gonna have to stop sharing so I can get back to it. Okay, here we go. Next question that we have here. Can the manufacturer hold 200 grams of psilocybin, which is 20 kilograms of dried mushrooms in Oregon?
Wait, sorry, what was the quantity?
200 grams of psilocybin, which is 20 kilograms of dried mushrooms.
That is a very good question.
The draft rules do say that a manufacturer may possess a total of no more than 20 grams of psilocybin, noting that these are still the draft rules, so that may fluctuate, but that's what's stated in these as of now.
Can you speak to the likelihood of legislation being passed regarding recreational use of psilocybin in other states, specifically California, New York, Florida, New Jersey, and Massachusetts?
Yeah, California had a pretty broad psychedelics proposal that was, there was a bill that was introduced last year and people thought that it was going to potentially get passed this year, but it actually got stripped down and then withdrawn. There was too much opposition for it to move forward. But I think that if Oregon is successful, it's kind of the test case. And with Colorado, I think that it'll follow the pattern of cannabis, where more and more states will start to see that this is working well and start to copying the proposals in Oregon and Colorado. It's a laboratory of democracy.
And with that being said, Oakland has also decriminalized the possession of psilocybin as well, although the sale is not legal. But with that being said, there are still black market sales going on there. And I've also heard of black market sales in New York City, although this is completely illegal. Please don't anyone do it.
And here's a question that has come up before. Always interesting. Currently, it seems there are many groups operating as churches, presumably to avail themselves of some level of federal protection. Could these quote unquote churches pursue operations in Oregon and eventually Colorado under existing structure, assuming they meet all other requirements? Or would it be best to establish a for-profit structure?
Yeah, theoretically, there could be the possibility of opening up a psychedelic church, but the law is actually pretty stringent on what
it is not easy.
Church, a religion.
It is not easy to establish yourself
that,
as a church that does this. It's
right. So I know that
yeah.
some cannabis dispensaries have just called themselves churches and try to operate without a license, and generally it's not successful because there's a pretty strict test about what is a true religion or true church.
Okay, and fascinating question, and we can go on. I apologize because there's several other questions we'd like to get to, but we do have to close. But if you do follow up to any of us by email, I promise you we will get back to you in a timely manner. Thank you very much for joining us on this webinar, and we are going to keep informed on the movements both in Oregon, Colorado, and everywhere else this opens up. So please, if you want to stay in